On Monday, the British Employment Tribunal found that David Miller's dismissal by Bristol University was caused or contributed to by his own actions. You may ask, who is David Miller? David Miller was a lecturer in Bristol University until 2021, when he was dismissed for inappropriate action toward his Jewish students. Now, he filed a case with the Employment Tribunal, and this tribunal in England decided that he had a point of being anti-Zionist as much as he wanted to, because his type of anti-Zionism is qualified by the tribunal as a belief that should be protected. It has protected characteristics worthy of respect in democratic society. Now, this David Miller is working now for Iran financed online information service as a commentator, and I guess one of the people that speaks on behalf of Iran. I guess this David Miller is a great Democrat and fighter for free thinking. In any case, this case is of great interest, I believe, to many people, not only in England, but worldwide, because many so-called anti-Zionists who in fact are hiding behind this anti-Zionism, hiding as anti-Semites, are going to be using this case in order to defend themselves and to lay the road toward more attacks against Jews. To talk about it, I have invited David Hirsh, who is a lecturer at Goldsmith College of London University, and who is the founder of a website that deals with leftist anti-Semitism. David, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe.
Hi, thank you very much.
In any case, so this is my little introduction about this case. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is about the significance of this case, because, most of our people do not know anything about this David Miller or about this tribunal and about the thinking behind it. What do you think is the significance of this case?
So I think, I don't think it's hugely significant. I think it's a bad result. It's a bad result because it will be portrayed as a vindication of anti-Zionism, and it will make people like university authorities more reluctant than they already were to take action against anti-Semitism. So it's not good, but the significance is not huge. And if you really read and understand the judgment, and you understand why and how it was produced, I think you would understand that it's not really a hugely significant.
He believes, from what I see that he's written afterwards, in the last 2 days, that this is a huge judgment that will have huge impact for the benefit of humanity.
Yes, he said that?
Yes.
Yeah. So that already gives you an in to his thinking, because his anti-Zionism is not a reasonable or a reasoned or an evidenced critique of Israel or what Israel does or what Israel is. His anti-Zionism is global, right? So if there's a blow against Zionism, for him, it's a victory for the whole of humanity, not just for the Palestinians or not just for Israel's neighbors, but for the whole of humanity, because his anti-Zionism is a kind of universal worldview.
He wants to destroy all Jewish organizations worldwide.
So he says that he wants to end all Zionist organizations. He says that the regime is sustained by Zionist organizations all over the world, and he wants to end Zionist organizations. Now, you and I
Completely, all.
completely. So you and I understand that in his understanding, all of the mainstream institutions of the Jewish community all over the world are Zionist. And for him, what that means is that they are racist and imperialist and Islamophobic and fundamentally evil.
Mhm.
So by saying that he wants to end all Zionist organizations all over the world, he knows very well what that means.
David, want to ask you a question. You know, he represents, as I see from what he writes, the left in England.
No, I don't think that's right. Firstly, he is not your average anti-Zionist. He is, even amongst anti-Zionists, he is extreme. In fact, he splits the anti-Zionists a little bit. When he was first fired, there were a lot of people, a lot of academics, a lot of other people rallied to his defense, including people in my own college. They didn't only do so on the basis of a kind of abstract academic freedom, but also on the basis that his work was very good, they said. But by the same token, quite a lot of people who are also perhaps anti-Zionist, but in any case, very hostile to the state of Israel, and people who, for example, hate the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Quite a number of them found a way to be critical of Miller. So Miller is not a sort of average standard figure amongst British anti-Zionists. He's quite an extreme figure, and he's a polarizing figure even amongst anti-Zionists, which makes it even more difficult to come to terms with the fact that the judges here have designated his anti-Zionism as being a protected belief, not just anti-Zionism in the abstract or in general, but his anti-Zionism as a protected belief.
Meaning his dynamic, extreme anti-Zionism, calling basically for violence against Jews worldwide.
Well, there's an extraordinary comment in the judgment, because they say, and it's quoted in my article, I'm not going to quote it, but I'm going to tell you what it says. It says, under cross-examination, David Miller denied that he supports furthering his anti-Zionism by means of violence, or he doesn't support violence at all. And it is said that he said that under cross-examination, and it is said that the tribunal accepted that as the truth. I think it's very clear, it's very obvious that that's not quite the truth, that Dave Miller is very comfortable with all kinds of violent opposition to what he calls Zionism. It's quite interesting, because if you look at his response to the 7th of October massacre, it's quite difficult to prove that he supports violence, because what he does is he says one must support the resistance, and he uses the name, the Hamas name for the day, which was the Al-Aqsa flood. He uses the name. He says one must support the resistance, but then he denies that the resistance was violent, and he denies that there was any killing, and he denies that there was any rape. I assume he doesn't deny that there was kidnapping, but perhaps he thinks that kidnapping is not violent. I don't know. It's extraordinary that the cross-examination allowed the tribunal to believe that Miller doesn't support violence.
Well, this is interesting, but you mentioned his supporters. I saw that letter that was signed by something like 200 Jews, nominal Jews, whatever it is, in support of this David Miller. Who are these people? 200. I did not know that there were so many Jews in academia that would be anti-Zionists and anti-Semites to such extent?
So I'm not familiar with the particular Jewish letter. There was a letter signed by many more, I think 700 or 800 academics.
No,
It doesn't surprise.
this is specifically
Yeah,
Jewish.
I understand. It doesn't surprise me because Jewish anti-Zionism is a very important element of anti-Zionism, and anti-Zionism is a very important element of contemporary anti-Semitism, and it doesn't surprise me at all.
Now, we're living through the time, especially after October 7, when anti-Semitism, you wrote a book, The Rebirth, or edited the book, The Rebirth of Anti-Semitism in 21st Century. Now, I used to write for In These Times, trying to get the leftists in the United States to support the democratic movement in the Soviet Union when it was beginning. From 84, 85, then Gorbachev came to power, and I remember my relationship with the so-called democratic socialists in the United States, and already at that time, they had negative attitude toward Israel. Now, this is nothing new in socialist movement, because going back to Lenin, his anti-Zionism is well known, and going back to the Führer of ideology, Karl Marx, who was dreaming about uh, uh, wiping out Jews um, as the significant element of the human progress. Not necessarily the way Hitler was thinking about physically, but in terms of the Jews will just disappear and assimilate as the humanity moves forward. But today, in 21st century, this book, The Rebirth of Anti-Semitism in 21st Century, what do you think is going on? Why?
um, well, um, I think if you read the first chapter of that book, it's written by Isabella Tabarovsky, who is somebody who was born in the Soviet Union, who went to America at the age of 17, and now lives in Israel. Her work is extremely thorough and smart, and she is the best informed person I know about Soviet anti-Zionism. And she traces it right back, and she knows all of the Russian language sources, and that's where we start in that book. So we say that the Soviet Union was building an ideology that is very similar, actually, to today's anti-Zionism. In fact, it is one of the places where today's left anti-Zionism comes from, and Isabella demonstrates that in the book. And the story, I think, is so look, anti-Semitism was not dead. It did not finish after the Holocaust, and it did not finish in the 20th century. But I think in the mainstream of democratic states, it was fairly quiet. I think in particular in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. And I think the idea that Israel was a particular and unique evil on the planet kind of ebbed a little bit, and most people on the left thought that eventually there would be a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and there would be a peace, and people would move on, and that was largely over. That changed, and there is a moment in 2001, right at the beginning of the 21st century, when you had the final, well, in the middle of 2000, you had the start of the second Intifada. And by the end of 2000, the beginning of 2001, you had really the final end of that phase of the peace process. The whole thing collapsed at Taba. And then in August 2001, you had Durban, the Durban Conference, World Conference Against Racism. which was a particular moment of a kind of reconfiguration of that old anti-Zionism, the anti-Zionism that had been accepted by the UN in the 70s, with Zionism equals racism, but had then ebbed a little bit in the 80s and 90s. It was right back in August 2001 at this international conference at Durban. It was a huge conference, and there was a really big campaign to make Zionism the key and symbolic form of racism in the whole world after the fall of apartheid.
Why?
And then, sorry,
Why?
and then a week later was 9/11. So those
I understand,
three.
but why? Why make, you said, anti-Zionism? I have a little bit different feeling, because for me, anti-Zionism, no matter what it's called, hides the basic need of many people to be anti-Semites.
So my view is slightly different. I don't think that anti-Zionism is generally a way of hiding. I don't think that most people who uh, repeat anti-Zionist views, I don't think they know that they are anti-Semitic and that they are hiding it, and that they have found a way that they can express their anti-Semitism without being criticized. I don't think that's generally what's happening. I think what generally is happening is that people feel that they are the good guys, not the bad guys. They feel that they are the genuine opponents of anti-Semitism, and they feel that being against Zionism is not anti-Semitic. And so they find this way to feel good and to be the good guys. And so I
But
don't
why
use,
focus? Why focus on a Jewish state?
well,
I mean, don't they have other states to focus, like 500,000 dead in Syria, 200, 300,000 dead in Yemen, and on and on and on?
yeah. Well, I'm not here to defend uh, the foolishness of
I mean,
anti.
they feel so good about it. The guy is working for Iranians as a propaganda guy, you know, and he's talking about himself that he is Democrat, that he is an honest man.
Well, I don't know what David Miller feels. I think David Miller, as I said, is quite an extremist figure, even amongst anti-Zionism. But I can tell you that people like Jeremy Corbyn, who used to be the leader of the Labour Party, I think it's quite clear that he does not regard himself as an anti-Semite, even though you and I might think that he embraces anti-Semitic ideas and politics in a whole number of ways. I think he doesn't. But I think it's quite important, because if it was people who were just pretending, it would be less threatening, right? Because you don't make a mass movement of people who are pretending. You make a mass movement of people who think that they are the good guys, and
I
who
did
think
not
that
mean
they.
that they're pretending. I meant to say that their desire to have a certain worldview, a certain worldview, then fine, because they cannot come out against Jews per se. They have now a different target, Israel, and they make their ideology standing on that anti-Israel position, not
Sure.
against
But
anti-Saudi Arabia position, not against anti-Russian position, anti-Chinese position, anti whatever, only anti-Israel. And they claim that they're for the benefit of humanity, and that they're honest people, and they care about other people. And to me, this is just hypocrisy of the highest sort.
So I understand, and it might well be hypocrisy. I was just quarreling with the word hide, because hide, you can only hide on purpose, knowing that you're hiding. You can't hide unconsciously. So
But
if you
why?
know you have something to hide.
You can hide unconsciously very, very well. In fact, what I believe, that most of them, when they attack Israel and use it as a pretext to actually hate Jews, I mean, once you strip it all, they still have tremendous anti-Jewish feelings. Tremendous. I mean, this guy David Miller, you said that he was a Scottish. In Scotland, not only the left wing, but most of society is anti-Jewish in a very, very big way, like in Ireland. It depends on what they think
Mm.
about themselves and how they
Yeah.
relate to the world.
See, I don't think I think there may well be underlying hostility to Jews, and certainly a lot of what is said by anti-Zionists about Israel mirrors the shape and the ferocity of older anti-Semitisms. I think that's true. I just don't think they know that that's what they're doing. So
But do they
that
care to know? They don't care to know.
um,
Like Hitler. Hitler was thinking of himself as a person fighting for truth and justice
yes,
and the very best thing for humanity.
yeah, I think that's quite important. I think that we need to remember that anti-Semites have always thought of themselves as
Yeah.
the good guys, and it's important because if we are brought up on images from 1950s war films where Nazis are portrayed as kind of self-consciously evil, I don't think we can understand why Nazism became a mass movement either. So I think that's right.
I
I
mean,
also think
they were for the working class Nazis. They
that's
were
right.
for freedom of
Yep.
Germans. They were for all good things, for
Yes.
righteousness, for honesty, for everything else.
Yes. And they were for saving not only Germany but the whole world from
The whole world, yes.
the thing that made us all miserable, which was the Jewish conspiracy.
And they did not need to do anything. When I say that behind the attacks against Israel hides their hatred of Jewish people. That's what I mean. Behind the anti-Semitism stands anti-Zionism stands anti-Semitism, and they do not want to know. They do not want to think about this. In fact,
Oh,
when
I think
you tell them, they deny it.
yeah, they do deny it, and they deny it because they don't know it's true.
They do not want to know it. Because if
Well,
they do know, it's recognition of the problem that they do not want to face.
that may be true, but I don't know what they want in their hearts. I only know what I can see.
But
I
you
also
you
think,
you you were a leftist, and still probably are a leftist now, of long pedigree. You know, uh, and the question is, why the left? Some people on the left who are born Jewish uh, try to move somehow different way when they recognize that there's a problem with the Jew hatred among their comrades. What happened to you? You were Trotskyite,
I
you
was
know.
a Trotskyite. My story, I think, is quite well. To me, it's quite interesting um, because I was in a small group, a small socialist group, which did not embrace anti-Semitism and which was not anti-Zionist, and in fact, which spent quite a lot of energy challenging and opposing anti-Semitism.
A Trotskyite group that was not anti-Zionist.
Yep, yep.
This is very
Um,
interesting.
it was called it's still around. It was called Socialist Organizer at the time, and it's now called the Alliance for Workers' Liberty.
Well,
And actually, quite a lot of my education about anti-Semitism comes from that time and from some of the people who were leaders in that small group. Um, Incidentally, I was smiling too when you said that you were trying to win people, socialists in America, against the Soviet Union, because we were also quite good on that too, actually.
I know the Trotskyites were trying to do it too, and not in the same way, but they had the differences, that, and it was easier for me to talk to them than, of course, to
Yeah.
many other segments of leftists.
I mean, look, we were not typical Trotskyists even, and actually, the history of the Trotskyist movement is rather interesting. Um, Trotskyism thought of itself as democratic Leninism. Now, you might think, and you might be right, that you can't have democratic Leninism, right? That either you have democracy or you have Leninism. And I think what happened to most of the Trotskyists in the end was that some of them embraced democracy and some of them embraced what they thought was Leninism. And some of them ended up, for example, in America as neocons, being quite right-wing people, but taking the idea of democracy globally seriously. So some of them ditched their Leninism and became what they thought to be Democrats, and others of them ditched their democracy and ended up as actually the last and the best Stalinists. So the history of Trotskyism is a very strange history.
I understand, but getting back to the rebirth of the anti-Semitism today,
Yeah.
uh, now it's everywhere now. I mean, and universities, colleges, widespread. I mean, it makes life of Jewish students there not easy at all.
Yeah. So let me just say also something else, because you said earlier on, I can't remember exactly what you said. You said that most of Scotland embraces anti-Semitism, and actually the polling is kind of more interesting than that. So the polling, at least in Britain as a whole, tells you that there is a pretty solid 25% of the population which embraces a whole number of anti-Semitic ideas.
Which country are you talking about?
Britain.
Britain. Okay.
There's a pretty solid 25% which embraces ideas, for example, that Israel is the same as the Nazis, or Israel is committing genocide, or I wouldn't want to be friends with a Zionist, those kinds of ideas. There's about 25%. And on the other side, there is about a solid 25% of people who are pretty clear about the problem of anti-Semitism. And then in the middle, there's a big 50% of people who don't know or don't care or are not interested. So it's not right to say that, Britain, for example, is anti-Semitic, but it's interesting because firstly, on the left and in universities, it's much more than 25%, I think. We haven't done the polling on that, but you can be sure that it's more than 25%, significantly more. And you can also be sure that— I would
imagine significantly more.
Yes. No, I agree.
70% or maybe even 80%, because a person
Okay,
cannot function in that environment unless you're against Israel.
You know that 95.3% of all statistics are made up on the spot, right?
Okay, so that's fine.
But I'd take your point, right? Also, they don't need to be a majority, right? 25%, 30%, 33% is actually a radical and sexy and exciting minority, and they're good with that. They can use that to build the movement.
So where do you think it's going?
Sorry?
Where do you think it's moving? Where do you think it's going? I mean, this is a young generation. They're going to become older, and they're going to bring this idea with them into their older age.
So that's true also, that anti-Semitism, not only what is called the new anti-Semitism, not only the anti-Semitism that relates to Israel is stronger amongst young people than old people, but now also even what is thought of as the old anti-Semitism is also stronger amongst young people.
And that's partly everyday attacks against Jews.
And that's partly because young people are more likely to embrace conspiracy fantasies. So you're right that the problem is greater amongst young people. As for what is the future, I don't know. I worry. For as long as I've been doing this work, which is about 20 years, or the time frame of the book, really, the 21st century, the problem has been getting more serious. There's no moment of catastrophe, but there is just a kind of relentless step away from us, and it is worrying. What will happen in the future is difficult to know. There are other threats in society other than anti-Semitism. There are other political threats, and there is a lot of instability, there is a lot of conspiracy fantasy, and there is a lot of populism. So I do worry about the future. But having said that, I'm also fundamentally optimistic because I think that anti-Semitism is inherently a symptom of anti-democratic politics and anti-democratic thinking. And I think that in the end, people will prefer democracy. Now, there might be a lot of terror and bloodshed first, but I do think that in the end, people prefer a society in which everybody's rights and liberties are respected. And I think in the end, people will rally to that.
Mm. So protection of free speech is a very important element of
Yes.
what you mentioned, democratic ideal.
Yes.
So basically, are you saying that the British Employment Tribunal that said that David Miller's philosophy is worthy of respect defends free speech?
So let me explain a couple of things about that so that people are clear. So the tribunal didn't say that it agreed with his philosophy. It didn't say that critics of his philosophy were wrong or were not worthy of respect. The measure, the criterion worthy of respect is actually a very low bar. And the principle, I mean, just as in America, every kind of speech is protected by law, by the First Amendment, right?
Yeah.
In Britain,
Protected against government's intrusion.
right. So in Britain, there is not quite such a low bar as in America, but still a pretty low bar. So when they say worthy of respect in a democratic society, it's a low bar, firstly. Secondly, the way that the court case proceeded was a real problem from my point of view, because this was a case between Bristol University and David Miller. And Bristol University did not do well all through this story. So they employed David Miller as a professor. They defended him for many years. Only very late in the story, when there was a very significant campaign about David Miller's anti-Semitism, only very late did Bristol University take action. And what they did was extraordinary. What they did was they employed a lawyer, a barrister, to go and write a report about what he was accused of doing. And the barrister came back and she said, well, some of what he's done is quite inflammatory and unpleasant, but nothing that he said is anti-Semitic and nothing that he said is unlawful. Now, of course, we don't agree with that. And we can go through some of the things that he said and we can make a very clear argument about why they are anti-Semitic. It turns out that the barrister that was employed by Bristol University as an independent judge had worked with David Miller's pal, a guy called Chris Williamson, who is a former Corbynite MP, who the Labour Party had tried very hard to expel for anti-Semitism. And this lawyer had defended Chris Williamson against the charge of anti-Semitism. And Chris Williamson certainly didn't win that defense, and he didn't deserve, the defense didn't have any value to it. And Chris Williamson and David Miller worked together for the Iranians. So the barrister that the Bristol University asked to be an independent judge turns out to be somebody who had worked for Chris Williamson, David Miller's pal and partner in Iranian propaganda.
And when they hired him, when the university hired this barrister, they did not know about his background?
So she was a woman. Her name was Aileen McColgan. I have no idea what they knew. I presume they didn't know, but who knows? And who knows where they got the name from? So So what happened was that this barrister came back and wrote a report for two reports for Bristol University saying that there's no case to answer for anti-Semitism for David Miller. So when they fired him, they did not fire him for anti-Semitism. So what did they fire him for? Well, we don't really know. It was, it was never really stated clearly. So it was always a problem. He was running around saying, I've been fired for my anti-Zionist belief. And everybody was saying, well, no, you haven't.
In the statement that was published by Bristol University, there's nothing about his ideas. It's clearly stated that he was fired for his action toward the students, not for his ideas.
It was stated, I can't remember what was stated, but nothing about anti-Semitism. It was something like
it said that he was pushing on students in not appropriate way his ideas, trying to agitate and do propaganda on them in inappropriate way. He has nothing to do with the ideas.
They didn't say that. What he was fired for was related to not only his abstract belief in Zionism as being an evil and a global evil, but also when he specified that he thought that Jewish organizations, including Jewish student organizations, and including his own Jewish students' organizations, made them pawns of a foreign racist power and made them assets of Israel. And when he started with that kind of specific rhetoric about student Jewish organizations, that was when Bristol fired him. But they still were not clear about exactly why. They just said he had violated the values of the university or something like that. So then when it came to the tribunal, when Miller was pushing back, Bristol couldn't say, or they felt they couldn't say, that he was fired because he related to his students in an anti-Semitic way, because they had this report which said that he was not anti-Semitic, and they had accepted it. And then
they did not say that he was acting in an anti-Semitic way. They said in an inappropriate way.
That's right. But why was it inappropriate if it was not anti-Semitic? What was inappropriate about it if it was not
inappropriate? Because he was pushing on them his views inappropriately, pushing.
But what was wrong with his views if they were not anti-Semitic?
It's not the problem. As far as I see, the university did not say that there was a problem with the views. The problem was with the way he was pushing it on them.
Well, none of this was clear. And let me just finish the story. Mm-hmm. So the tribunal in this court case, it did not hear an argument about anti-Semitism. It did not hear anybody saying that Miller's philosophy was anti-Semitic. It did not hear anybody saying that anything that Miller did was anti-Semitic. And the reason it didn't hear that is because it was a case between Bristol, who accepted he was not anti-Semitic, and Miller, who said he was not anti-Semitic. So there was so in other words, this was a court case in which Jews were absent, right? There were no Jews. There was no
Jewish. Not mention either anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism. Nothing of the sort, either here or there. The interesting thing to me is that this tribunal, which I believe, is some kind of a clownish, people are sitting there, clowns. They decided themselves on their own that anti-Zionism, the way.
But hang on. I still haven't finished the story. The point is that there were no Jews represented in this court, so there was nobody there who had a real interest in making the case about the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Bristol didn't have an interest in it, and anyway had already committed themselves to a different position.
But
and of course, Miller
does it make whether there was Jews on court or not?
Well, the difference it makes
is that the judges, they have to judge fairly.
Yes, but the judges cannot judge that something is anti-Semitic when none of the parties of the case have made that argument or presented any evidence.
But there was no case at all, whether it was anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or anything else. The
Neither
university,
party,
Bristol
neither
University, was talking about just the behavior of the
exactly.
teacher toward the students.
Exactly. So you or I might think that the judges should have sat there and said, oh my gosh, this is anti-Semitic. But the judges said, no one in this case has made an argument or has brought forward any evidence that there is anti-Semitism here. And therefore, we're going to assume that there isn't. That's what they did.
But the university did not mention either anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism as the cause for firing of this guy.
Right.
So
So
there
this
was
is the
nothing
problem.
that the judges should be talking about anti-Semitism. Maybe he was fired because he did not like women, or he did not like, Martians on the moon.
Well, but that's
How
right.
did they know what was the problem?
So they fired a professor who had tenure, and they never really said coherently why they had done it. And that was a problem.
So why did anti-Semitism sprung into the judges' heads?
But it didn't. The judges
It
said,
did, because in their ruling, it says precisely that.
well, in their ruling, they say that there was no evidence that he was anti-Semitic,
But
and
there
that
was
both
never a
parties
question.
in
They
the
were
case
never.
had said that he was not anti-Semitic.
I
That's
understand.
what they said.
But what university said should have never produced in judges' minds the idea that there was some kind of a problem with what was he saying, with his philosophy. Because the only thing they said, university said, was the way he was pushing his philosophy on the students. That's the
Yeah.
only way. And the judges on court should have answered that. But then they decided that there's going to be something about this philosophy, and they
Yeah.
made this philosophy into a legitimate anti-Zionism, extreme anti-Zionism.
Well,
They made it
that's
into a
right.
legitimate form of philosophy that
That's right.
the
So
scholars can follow.
as a non-lawyer, as a layperson, it seems to me that if the judges didn't hear any evidence about the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, then they should not have made the determination that Miller's anti-Zionism is a protected belief. If they hadn't heard the evidence, they had no right, no business making the determination that it was worthy of respect in a democratic society. It seems to me. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know why they made that determination when they knew that they hadn't heard the evidence.
Those judges should be evaluated whether they should continue working in those positions.
So I say in the piece too, I think it's interesting because after the 7th of October, a lot of British Jews have been worried about their institutions, worried about the way the police has refused to intervene to prevent anti-Semitic demonstrations, worried about the ways in which there have been no prosecutions of pro-Hamas propaganda, worried about the ways in which the BBC has reported events in Israel. So as Anthony Julius says, people have been worried about their institutions. And I think out of this case, we can say pretty safely that we should also now be worried about the University of Bristol, who did not manage properly to defend its Jewish students or its Jewish staff. And we should worry about the tribunal, which did not manage properly to defend the Jews involved in this story. And there are, some very kind of specific Jews
I'm
we're
sorry,
talking
it was
about.
not simply improperly defend Jews in this story. No, the judges, the way I see it, just came up with their own case that had nothing to do whatsoever with why this guy was fired. they came up in their own minds with the idea that he was fired because of his anti-Zionist philosophy. In the ruling of the Bristol University, nothing like this was mentioned whatsoever as the cause for his firing.
Well, I'm not certain about that. I mean, I think that he was fired because his anti-Zionism, his anti-Zionist philosophy, was anti-Semitic, and one of the ways in which that was
I
manifested
did not find it
was
in that ruling, but in any case,
no, it's not in the ruling. That's right. It's not in the ruling because it was not in the independent report from Bristol, and because Bristol didn't make the case.
yeah.
And nobody with an interest in anti-Semitism had any right to speak in this case. We were not there.
In any case, it's time up. Our hour is up. David, thank you very much for stopping by and for helping us to understand the situation around this David Miller. And hopefully it's not going to have the impact that I'm afraid it actually will have impact in England and in the United States and everywhere else.
Please allow me to mention our website, which is the website of the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism,
Wow. Okay.
which is at londonantisemitism.com. London Antisemitism, all one word, .com. And you'll find our website, and you'll also find the book that is behind you, and you'll find a link to our brilliant book series, and lots of other good things.
Yes, if you'll send me those links, we'll attach it below this video on YouTube.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. David, thank you very much, and have a great day. It's already
Thank you very much, and you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.